It's July 1st, 1863. The town of Gettysburg wakes up to the sound of war. Farmers leave their fields. Children hide behind wooden shutters. On the hills, soldiers take position, hearts pounding with fear and duty. No one knows it yet, but these quiet fields are about to witness 3 days of blood, fire, and destiny. Over 170,000 men, brothers, friends, Americans will clash here, not for land or gold, but for the soul of their nation. This is the Battle of Gettysburg. And if stories like this send chills down your spine, then hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started on a journey through the most powerful moments in human history. The year was 1861, and America stood at the edge of self-destruct. For decades, tension had been building between the northern and southern states, two worlds within one country, bound by the same flag, but divided by belief, economy, and morality. The North was industrial and fast-changing, driven by the idea of progress and equality, while the South remained deeply tied to its plantations, its traditions, and the cruel institution of slavery. For the South, slavery was not just an economic system. It was a way of life, a foundation of their identity. But for the North, it had become a moral wound, a stain on the nation's promise that all men were created equal. The clash between these two visions of America grew louder with every passing year, until words could no longer hold back the storm. In November 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the 16th President of the United States, a man who opposed the expansion of slavery, but spoke carefully of unity. Yet his victory was seen by many in the South as a threat to their entire way of life. Within months, 11 Southern states declared secession, forming their own country, the Confederate States of America, and raising their own flag. What began as political disagreement quickly turned into open rebellion. In April 1861, Confederate guns fired on Fort Sumter, and in that single moment, the United States of America split in two. The North rallied under the Union flag, determined to preserve the nation. The South fought under a new banner, driven by the cry of independence. It was the birth of the American Civil War, a war not against a foreign power, but against itself. Towns that had once traded goods now traded gunfire. Rivers that once carried commerce now carried bodies. Families found themselves divided by loyalty, faith, and geography. Fathers fought against sons. Brothers stood on opposite sides of the battlefield. Letters from home were written to men who might never return. The war reached into every home, every heart, and every prayer, tearing the very soul of the nation apart. Lincoln's greatest battle was not only on the battlefield, but within his conscience. He had sworn to preserve the Union, yet he could see that peace could not come without confronting the moral evil at its core, slavery. He once said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And now, that divided house was burning. Both sides believed they fought for freedom. The South claimed it was fighting for the right of self-government, while the North fought for the survival of a single nation under God. But beneath all the speeches, the resolutions, and the marching drums, the war was about something far greater, the definition of what America would be. Would it remain a land built on the chains of others, or would it finally live up to its founding words, liberty and justice for all? By 1863, the war had already taken more lives than anyone had imagined. The once proud young republic was drowning in its own blood, and yet neither side would surrender. Every soldier believed that his death could bring meaning to something greater than himself. Across thousands of miles, camps burned, prayers rose, and drums echoed through the night. The land itself seemed to cry for peace, yet peace was nowhere to be found. This was not a war fought for conquest or power. It was a war for identity, for the heart and soul of America itself. By the summer of 1863, the Civil War had entered its third brutal year, and amid the chaos and bloodshed, one name had risen above all others in the South: General Robert E. Lee. To his men, he was not only a commander but a symbol of courage, faith, and Southern pride. Calm, disciplined, and deeply devoted to his home state of Virginia, Lee had led the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia through one victory after another, defeating larger Union forces at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. His soldiers trusted him completely, believing that wherever Lee led, victory would follow. But behind his calm demeanor, Lee understood a grim truth. Time was not on the South's side. The Confederacy lacked the manpower, industry, and supplies that kept the Union war machine alive. Every victory they achieved drained their strength a little more. Lee knew that if the South continued to fight defensively, it would eventually be crushed under the weight of Northern numbers. To change the course of the war, he needed something daring, something bold, a move that could shake the North to its core and force it to reconsider its will to fight. Lee's plan was simple but audacious. He would take the war into Union territory. He would invade the North, strike deep into Pennsylvania, and deliver a blow so powerful that it might end the war itself. He hoped that a decisive victory on Northern soil would crush Union morale, weaken the public's support for President Lincoln, and push the government toward peace negotiations. At the same time, Lee believed that a great Confederate triumph could attract the attention of European powers, like Britain and France, nations that had been watching the conflict from afar. If they saw the South as capable of victory, they might recognize the Confederacy as an independent nation, open trade routes, and provide the diplomatic or material support that the South desperately needed. Such recognition could change everything. It could make the Confederacy not just a rebellion, but a nation. Yet Lee knew the risks. His army would be far from home, deep in enemy territory, without the supply lines that had sustained them in Virginia. One mistake, one defeat, could destroy everything. Still, Lee believed that boldness was their only chance. His men had faith in him, and he had faith in them. They were hardened by battle, bound by loyalty, and united by the dream of Southern independence. In early June 1863, Lee began his great gamble. Columns of gray-clad soldiers marched north through the Shenandoah Valley, their boots stirring the dust of long roads, their banners fluttering against the summer sky. They crossed the Potomac River and entered Union territory for the second time in the war, hearts filled with pride and purpose. Civilians watched in silence as the Confederate army passed, tens of thousands strong, their faces weathered by war, but their spirits unbroken. For them, this march was more than movement. It was destiny in motion. The sound of their steps echoed across the valleys and fields like a living drumbeat, steady, confident, and unstoppable. As Lee's army advanced deeper into Pennsylvania, he believed that history itself was marching beside them, and that with one great victory, the South might finally secure its freedom. Each footstep brought them closer to the battle that would decide not only their fate, but the fate of a nation, the battle that would soon be remembered as Gettysburg. While General Lee's army pressed northward, the Union was far from sleeping. In Washington, President Abraham Lincoln faced mounting pressure as the war dragged into its third exhausting year. Northern morale was fragile, shaken by defeats and heavy losses, and the people demanded results. The Union Army of the Potomac had seen a string of commanders rise and fall, each unable to deliver the decisive victory Lincoln so desperately needed. But now a new name had emerged: General George Gordon Meade, a quiet, disciplined soldier. Meade was not known for grand speeches or dramatic flair, but for his steady hand and sharp military mind. Just days before the greatest battle of the war, Meade had been given command of the Union's largest army, an overwhelming responsibility for any man. He had barely taken his position when word reached him that Lee's army was deep in Union territory, threatening Pennsylvania and perhaps even the capital itself. Meade understood what was at stake, not just his career, but the survival of the Union. There was no time for hesitation. Gathering his strength, he ordered the Army of the Potomac, nearly 90,000 strong, to march north. The chase had begun, across the green fields and rolling hills of Maryland and Pennsylvania. Two massive armies moved like shadows of destiny, each searching for the other. The Confederates, 75,000 in number, marched with pride and purpose, believing they were carrying the hopes of a new nation on their shoulders. The Union soldiers, weary from years of war, marched with grim determination to defend their homeland. Every step was a test of endurance. The roads were thick with dust, the air heavy with summer heat, and the sound of thousands of boots striking the ground echoed like thunder through the countryside. Civilians watched anxiously from their doorsteps, their towns trembling under the weight of history passing by. No one truly knew where the two armies would meet. but all could sense that something monumental was coming. Lee sought to strike a blow that would shake the Union to its core, while Meade aimed to protect the very soul of the Republic. Scouts and cavalry units from both sides crisscrossed the countryside, searching for signs of the enemy, sending back urgent reports that often contradicted each other. It was a deadly game of pursuit and positioning, a race to see who would find the advantage first. Yet amidst the chaos of maps, orders, and desperate marches, fate itself was quietly at work. Both armies, unaware of the other's exact position, were converging on the same small town in southern Pennsylvania, a place called Gettysburg. It was a quiet community of farmers, crossroads, and open fields, surrounded by gentle hills and ridges. No one planned to fight there, and yet destiny had chosen it. On June 30th, 1863, the first elements of the two armies caught sight of one another near the outskirts of Gettysburg, and the spark that would ignite one of the greatest battles in American history was lit. Neither Lee nor Meade could have known that their chase across the countryside was about to end in a clash that would define the future of their nation. What began as a race would soon become a storm, 3 days of fire, blood, and courage that would echo for generations to come. The morning of July 1st, 1863, dawned warm and quiet over the rolling hills of Gettysburg. But the calm was only an illusion. As the sun rose, gray columns of Confederate soldiers under General Henry Heth approached the small Pennsylvania town, searching for supplies and unaware that a major Union force was near. On the other side, Union cavalry under the command of General John Buford had arrived just in time to hold the ground. West of the town, Buford, an experienced and sharp-eyed officer, knew the land well enough to recognize its strategic value. The ridges and high ground south of town, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, and the long stretch of Cemetery Ridge would be crucial if a major battle broke out. And Buford knew one thing for certain: the Confederates were coming. With only a few thousand men on horseback, he prepared to delay an army of tens of thousands. As the first shots rang out on the morning breeze, the Battle of Gettysburg had begun. The opening clashes were fierce and chaotic. Union cavalry fought dismounted, using fences and trees for cover, buying precious time as the blue-coated infantry rushed north to reinforce them. Soon, the fields outside Gettysburg were alive with smoke, gunfire, and the cries of the wounded. By mid-morning, Confederate forces under General Heth pressed forward in overwhelming numbers, driving Buford's men back toward the town. Reinforcements from the Union, the First Corps under General John Reynolds, arrived just in time, and Reynolds, one of the Union's finest commanders, immediately threw his men into the fight. But fate was cruel that day. Reynolds was struck by a bullet and killed almost instantly, becoming one of the first major casualties of the battle. Despite his loss, Union soldiers fought bravely, forming stubborn defensive lines north and west of Gettysburg. The battle grew larger by the hour as more Confederate divisions poured in under Generals Ewell and Hill. The sound of musket fire rolled across the fields like thunder, and the once quiet town became a battlefield of chaos and blood. By afternoon, the Union forces were heavily outnumbered. General Meade, still miles away, had ordered his men to hold until the rest of the army could arrive. But the pressure was too great. The Union lines began to buckle and collapse under the relentless Confederate assault. Street by street, the soldiers in blue were forced to retreat through Gettysburg, fighting as they fell back toward the hills south of town. Civilians hid in their basements as the battle raged through their homes. When the dust settled, the Confederates held the town itself, and the weary Union soldiers regrouped on the higher ground of Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. They had lost the first day, but in their retreat, they had found something far more valuable: the high ground. From those ridges, they could command the battlefield and stand firm against whatever came next. General Lee arrived that evening, victorious but cautious. His men had pushed the enemy back, but they had failed to take the heights that dominated the field. As darkness fell over Gettysburg, the moans of the wounded echoed through the streets, and the fields were littered with the fallen. The first day had ended with a Confederate victory, yet Lee knew it was incomplete. For all their courage and bloodshed, his army had won the ground, but not the hill. And in war, sometimes that difference decides everything. The dawn of July 2nd, 1863, broke over Gettysburg with an uneasy stillness, the kind that comes before the storm. The Confederates had taken the town, but the Union Army now held the high ground, a line that curved from Culp's Hill on the right, across Cemetery Hill and Ridge, and down to Rocky Hills at the southern end known as Little Round Top and Big Round Top. General Lee, confident after his first day's success, believed that one more powerful strike could shatter the Union line and end the battle in victory. His plan was bold and simple: attack both Union flanks at once, crush their defenses, and roll up the army from the sides. As the morning turned to afternoon, Lee's generals prepared their men for one of the bloodiest days of the entire war. On the Union side, General George Meade studied the map spread before him inside a small farmhouse. He knew the ground was his greatest advantage, but he also knew Lee would come for the hills. The fate of the army, and perhaps the nation, rested on holding them. As the sun climbed higher, the fields and ridges south of Gettysburg exploded with violence. Confederate forces under General James Longstreet launched a massive assault on the Union left flank, slamming into positions at the Peach Orchard, the wheat field, and a rocky area soon to be known as Devil's Den. The fighting there was savage beyond words. Musket fire at point-blank range, artillery shells bursting through trees, and men locked in desperate hand-to-hand combat among the boulders. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the ground soaked in blood. Every inch of land was contested, every stone and fence fought over again and again. By late afternoon, the battle reached Little Round Top, the southernmost anchor of the Union line. There, a small group of soldiers from Maine under the command of Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain stood facing an overwhelming Confederate assault. They were outnumbered, exhausted, and nearly out of ammunition. Chamberlain, a former school teacher turned soldier, knew that if his men gave way, the Confederate army would sweep behind the entire Union line and destroy it. As wave after wave of gray uniforms surged up the slope, his men fired until their rifles were empty, then used their bayonets to hold the line. When it seemed they could stand no more, Chamberlain made a desperate decision that would become legend. He ordered a bayonet charge. With a fierce shout, the men of the 20th Maine swept down the hill, crashing into the enemy with steel and determination. Against all odds, they drove the Confederates back and saved the Union flank. Meanwhile, fighting raged across the center and right of the Union line. The wheat field changed hands 6 times in a single afternoon, and Devil's Den became a place of horror, where sharpshooters and wounded men lay side by side among the rocks. As the sun set, the fields around Gettysburg burned with the fire of cannon and musket. Thousands lay dead or dying, and the cries of the wounded carried far into the night. Yet despite all the fury, the Union line still held. The Confederates had attacked with unmatched courage, but the Union soldiers had fought with unbreakable resolve. When darkness finally fell, Lee's army withdrew from the slopes, leaving behind a landscape of devastation and heroism. The hills of Gettysburg were stained red, but they remained in Union hands. And as the exhausted soldiers tended to their wounded, one truth echoed across the battlefield. The fields had turned red, but the line did not break. As night fell over Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863, the roar of cannon and musket faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant cries of the wounded. The once green fields and quiet hills of Pennsylvania had been transformed into a vast graveyard, where the living moved carefully among the fallen, searching for friends, water, or simply the strength to survive another day. Lanterns flickered through the darkness as stretcher bearers and surgeons worked tirelessly, their hands slick with blood, their faces pale from exhaustion. The scent of gunpowder and death hung heavy in the humid air. Both armies knew that the fight was not over. The storm had paused, not ended. Across the lines, General Robert E. Lee sat beneath a dim light, his maps spread out before him. His victories in the South had been swift and sure, but here, at Gettysburg, the ground itself seemed to resist him. Yet his resolve did not waver. He believed that one more strike, a single overwhelming blow, could break the Union Army and end the war in a blaze of triumph. He prayed quietly, seeking guidance and strength. his face calm but his mind burdened by the weight of command. Every decision he made now carried the fate of a nation on its shoulders. To the north, in the Union camp, General George Meade was equally restless. He had been in command of the Army of the Potomac for less than a week, and now he faced the greatest challenge of his life. Surrounded by weary officers, Meade studied his lines and prepared his defenses. He knew that Lee would attack again, and likely at the center, where the Union line curved like a fishhook along Cemetery Ridge. Orders were given through the night: reinforce the center, resupply the artillery, and hold every inch of ground. Soldiers huddled together under their blankets, writing letters home by the light of flickering candles, unaware if they would ever send them. Some prayed, others stared into the darkness, lost in thoughts of home, their hearts heavy with fear and determination. In the Confederate camp, men cleaned their rifles and whispered of victory. In the Union ranks, soldiers tightened their belts and swore they would not yield. Between the two armies stretched a mile of open field, silent now, but soon to become a killing ground. The night was strangely beautiful, with stars shining above a landscape scarred by war. But even the heavens seemed to hold their breath. The air smelled of smoke and fear, a warning carried on the cool breeze that drifted across the ridges. Horses neighed softly, cannon stood ready, and the faint murmur of prayer could be heard from both sides. Neither Lee nor Meade could sleep. Both men walked the lines, speaking quietly to their officers, feeling the tension that gripped every soldier in their armies. They knew that when the sun rose again, it would bring not just light, but judgment. The coming day would decide more than victory or defeat. It would decide the future of the Union, the dream of freedom, and the fate of millions yet unborn. As the candles burned low and the stars dimmed toward dawn, the world seemed to wait in silence for what was to come. Two great armies lay facing each other, hearts pounding, weapons ready. And in that fragile, haunted stillness before the storm, both generals understood the terrible truth that tomorrow, the fields of Gettysburg would once again run red, and that by nightfall, the destiny of America itself would hang in the balance. The morning of July 3, 1863, rose under a blazing sun, casting its golden light over the scarred fields of Gettysburg. The air was still, thick with heat and tension, as both armies prepared for what everyone sensed would be the final and decisive day. General Robert E. Lee, believing that the Union center had been weakened by 2 days of relentless combat, made a fateful decision. He would strike directly at the heart of the enemy line. He ordered a massive assault, one that he believed could shatter the Union position and end the war in a single, thunderous blow. His chosen force numbered around 12,500 men, led by General George Pickett and other brave commanders. These soldiers, many young and full of faith, had marched far and fought long, and though exhausted, they were ready to follow Lee's command without hesitation. Across the field, the Union Army waited behind strong defensive lines along Cemetery Ridge, their cannons aimed and their rifles loaded. The space between the two armies, nearly a mile of open farmland, was soon to become a corridor of death. Before the charge began, the Confederates unleashed one of the greatest artillery bombardments in American history. For nearly 2 hours, the air shook as more than 100 cannons roared in unison, their shells screaming through the sky and exploding across the Union lines. The earth trembled, trees splintered, and the fields were swallowed in smoke. But despite the fury, most of the Confederate shots went high, while the Union guns held their fire, waiting for the right moment to answer. When the bombardment finally ceased, an eerie silence fell, the kind of silence that comes before tragedy. Then came the order. The long gray line stepped forward from the woods, stretching across the fields as far as the eye could see. Flags waved in the hot wind, drums beat, and officers shouted commands over the din. As they marched, the Union artillery suddenly erupted again, sending deadly bursts of canister and shell tearing through the Confederate ranks. Men fell by the hundreds, yet the line kept moving, steady and determined, their footsteps beating against the ground like a grim drum of fate. Smoke filled the air until friend and foe alike were hidden in a haze of fire and dust. Still, they came on, across fences, through wheat and grass, over the bodies of fallen comrades, each step bringing them closer to the waiting Union rifles. The noise was deafening, a storm of iron and lead. When the Confederates reached the stone wall at the Union center, they threw themselves into the fight with desperate courage. For a few brief moments, they broke through the line, and the outcome of the entire war hung in the balance. But Union reinforcements surged forward, and the line held. The Confederate assault collapsed under the crushing weight of fire. What had begun as a proud march now turned into chaos and ruin. Thousands lay dead or wounded, and those who could still walk staggered back across the field they had so bravely crossed. Only minutes before, General Lee watched from a distance, his face heavy with sorrow as he saw the destruction of his finest men. The assault had failed. Pickett's division was shattered, and with it, the hopes of the Confederacy. As the smoke cleared and the cries of the wounded echoed across the field, a terrible truth settled over both armies. The South had fought with unimaginable bravery, but no courage could stand against the storm that met them on that field. They had advanced into the very jaws of death, and the dream of the Confederacy died with them. When the thunder of battle finally faded on the evening of July 3, 1863, a haunting silence settled over Gettysburg. The air that had once vibrated with cannon fire and screams was now thick with the smell of smoke, blood, and sorrow. The great fields that only days before had been alive with marching men were now covered with the dead and dying, gray and blue mingled together, their lifeless bodies lying side by side as if death itself had ended the divisions that war had created. Horses lay scattered across the trampled earth, cannon stood silent, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the night like the voices of ghosts. Union soldiers moved cautiously through the haze, stepping over fallen comrades, searching for water, for the living, for any sign of hope. They had fought through 3 days of fire and fury and had somehow endured. Many could not yet comprehend that the storm was truly over. Across the lines, General Robert E. Lee rode among the remnants of his shattered army. His men, once proud and undefeated, now limped or lay broken in the dirt, their faces pale with exhaustion and disbelief. Lee's heart was heavy with grief, yet he remained calm, speaking gently to those who could still hear him. "It is my fault," he said quietly. "It is all my fault." There was no anger in his voice, only sorrow. The Confederate dream of victory in the North had been crushed beneath the guns of Gettysburg. As darkness fell, Lee ordered his army to prepare for retreat. The long columns of wagons and wounded began their slow, painful march back toward Virginia through the rain and mud. Behind them, they left thousands of dead comrades, young men who would never return home. Their lives ended far from the fields they once plowed or the streets they once walked. In the Union lines, General George Meade stood atop Cemetery Ridge, looking out across the devastation. His army had held, but at a terrible cost. The ground was littered with torn uniforms, shattered weapons, and the lifeless faces of men who had fought with unyielding courage. The survivors sat in silence, too weary to speak, their eyes empty from what they had seen. The scale of death was beyond imagination. In just 3 days, more than 50,000 men had been killed, wounded, or gone missing. Fathers, sons, and brothers from every corner of the divided nation. No one who had been at Gettysburg would ever forget it. The sun rose slowly on July 4th, its light revealing a landscape that no painter could ever capture. A field soaked in blood, scattered with the relics of human sacrifice. Soldiers from both sides worked together to tend to the wounded and bury the dead. The war's hatred momentarily replaced by shared grief. The Union had won the battle, but there was no celebration. There was only exhaustion, disbelief, and the sobering realization of what that victory had cost. Across the shattered countryside, the moans of men drifted through the morning air, mingling with the sound of shovels turning the earth. Gettysburg had become more than a place of battle. It was now a graveyard for a generation and a symbol of the terrible price of division. In the silence that followed the storm, America stood wounded, but not broken. Its fields forever scarred by the memory of 3 days that had tested the soul of a nation. For months after the guns fell silent at Gettysburg, the ground still bore the scars of war. The hills were dotted with graves, and the air carried the faint echo of a battle that had changed a nation. It was November 19, 1863, and thousands had gathered at the newly established Soldiers' National Cemetery to honor the fallen. Among them stood President Abraham Lincoln, a tall, weary figure marked by the weight of war and loss. The country he led was still bleeding, its heart torn between grief and hope. He had not come to celebrate victory, nor to glorify battle, but to remind the nation why so many had died. The main speech of the day had already been given by a famous orator who spoke for over 2 hours, but it was Lincoln's few words, just 272 of them, that would echo through history. Standing before a silent crowd, his voice steady but soft, Lincoln began. For 67 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In those opening words, he reached back to the birth of America, linking the sacrifices at Gettysburg to the very promise of the nation's founding. He spoke not of armies or generals, but of ideals, of freedom, equality, and the enduring spirit of democracy. Around him, the graves of Union soldiers stretched across the field, rows upon rows of young men who had given their lives so that the nation might live. Lincoln reminded the living that their task was not to mourn endlessly, but to ensure that the dead had not died in vain. He said, "It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced." His words transformed the meaning of the war. It was no longer just a struggle to preserve the Union, but a test of whether a nation built on liberty could endure. His speech was brief, less than 3 minutes long, yet within those moments, he redefined the purpose of the conflict and offered healing to a fractured people. "That we here highly resolve," he said, "that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." When he finished, there was only a hushed silence, no great applause, no cheering, just quiet reverence for the depth of what had been said. Many who stood there did not yet realize that they had witnessed one of the most profound moments in American history. In the simplicity of his language and the power of his conviction, Lincoln gave voice to the soul of a wounded nation. The fields of Gettysburg, once filled with death, now held a message of rebirth, a promise that from the ashes of war, freedom and unity could rise again. In just a few words, Abraham Lincoln reminded America not only of what it had lost, but of what it still could become. His speech was not a conclusion, but a beginning, the moment when the nation began to heal, and the dream of liberty was reborn. Gettysburg was more than a battle. It was the turning point of the American Civil War, the moment when the fate of a divided nation began to change. Before those 3 days in July 1863, the Confederacy seemed unstoppable. General Robert E. Lee had marched from victory to victory, his army confident, his strategy bold, his soldiers believing they were destined to secure Southern independence. But Gettysburg broke that illusion. The defeat forced Lee to retreat back to Virginia, and from that moment on, he would never again lead an invasion into the North. The tide had turned. The Union, battered and bleeding, had finally stood firm. The victory gave the North something it desperately needed: belief. Belief that the war could still be won, that the Union could be preserved, and that the sacrifices made on so many battlefields had meaning. For the Confederacy, however, Gettysburg marked the beginning of decline. The South's resources were dwindling, its men exhausted, its dreams slowly fading under the weight of an endless war. The loss shattered morale, and the myth of Confederate invincibility crumbled. Across the land, families continued to mourn, and cities continued to burn. But the spirit of the Union began to rise again. Gettysburg became more than a military victory. It became a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and rebirth. The fields where thousands had fallen turned into sacred ground, a silent reminder of the cost of freedom. In the years that followed, veterans returned to the hills and valleys of Gettysburg, not as enemies, but as brothers once again, standing together in remembrance of the pain they had shared. The battle came to represent not just a clash of armies, but the struggle for the soul of America itself, a nation tested by fire, learning what it truly meant to be united. The Union's triumph at Gettysburg renewed hope and strengthened the resolve to finish what had been started, the fight to end slavery and to ensure that liberty and equality would belong to all. It showed that even in the darkest hour, courage could prevail, and that from the ruins of division, a stronger, freer country could emerge. The echoes of Gettysburg would carry through generations, reminding Americans that unity is not born from comfort, but from sacrifice, not from peace, but from perseverance. The men who fought there, both blue and gray, left behind a legacy written in blood and honor, a lesson that freedom demands a price, and that the dream of one nation, indivisible, is worth every tear shed in its defense. Gettysburg was the crucible in which the identity of America was forged anew. It was the battle where the nation looked into the mirror of its own suffering and found not despair, but destiny. And though time has washed away the sounds of cannon and cry, the spirit of Gettysburg endures, a solemn promise that the unity born from sacrifice will never be forgotten, and that the dream of America, tested by war, will forever rise again from the ashes of its own trials. And if stories like this send chills down your spine, then hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started on a journey through the most powerful moments in human history.